But we're going to move inland a little bit. All eyes on Iowa. 2020 Democratic candidates prepare to swarm the state this week as the dust settles on their first debate.
Voters in Iowa will be the first in the nation to have their voices heard, meaning those results can make or break a campaign.
Yeah, so who has the edge right now? Joining us now to weigh in is the CEO of WPA Intelligence, Chris Wilson. Thanks for coming on, Chris. We're going to start with this new poll from CNN SRSS, and it's got some interesting numbers. You can see here, Joe Biden, his lead has diminished dramatically at 22%, and look who's surging, Kamala Harris. What do you think of this?
You know, I think we all knew that Biden was going to start to falter at some point. His debate performance clearly had a lot to do with that. I think what's interesting is you see Elizabeth Warren staying flat in this poll, and by all accounts, she had a good performance. It's almost like she is being punished because she was at the kids' table instead of the adults' table with Biden and Harris. And what you now, as they start to move into Iowa, it is important to be able to continue that momentum, not only for the purposes of being able to be taken seriously by the voters there, but also as they begin to winnow down the field for the second debate. And it's, you look at the candidates who are now who have dissipated even more, like O'Rourke, for instance, where he started out very strong. He's now struggling to even be able to make the stage the second time. But the one thing I can tell you about Iowa, and having worked for Ted Cruz, who won Iowa in 2016, is every voter there is going to give every candidate a full consideration. They're going to evaluate them individually. They're probably going to meet them, probably going to have each candidate sit down in their living room and interview them personally. And when it comes down to it, they really make some pretty solid decisions, in my opinion.
Just about a minute ago, you talked about Beto O'Rourke and how he's been struggling as of late. He's one of many candidates in Iowa this week. You can see a full list of candidates there. Of those who are going to be there this week, who do you think really needs to work on some damage control?
Well, the problem for Joe Biden is he is spiraling right now, and so he's probably the one who has the most to gain in terms of trying to stop the bleeding, if you will. I think Sanders also has a little bit of struggle. He's struggling a little bit. He did very well in Iowa last time. He needs to be able to regain that momentum, but it's really tough to be an insurgent twice. But I will say the ones that you're going to start to see this field winnow and start to drop out are going to be the O'Rourkes and some of the other lesser-known candidates that have got to make it above 2% in the national polling to be able to even make the stage next time. And that's really the challenge that I think exists. I think the Democrats got part of the debate right in allowing everyone to be up there, doing 2 nights of debates instead, as we did on the Republican side, did one beforehand and then one after. It's worked out well. But now, the bad part of it is that they've had to spend so much money on fundraising. You take, for instance, a Julian Castro, who by all accounts had a good performance. He's probably succeeding at O'Rourke's expense there. But he spent over a third of his money that he's raised so far just to be able to increase his number of donors. By some accounts, spend as much as $60 to acquire a single donor, and that's a real challenge for them as they try, and they've got to kind of balance it out. Do we spend time in Iowa? Do we spend time in New Hampshire? Do we try and gain voters, or we just try and raise money? And that's a real difficult place for a campaign to be in.
You take donor money to try and buy more donors. How funny is that?
That's exactly right, yeah.
What about Mayor Pete? I thought he had a really good debate night. He seemed very pragmatic and sensible. And he's only at like 4% right now, but he's raised $25 million in Q2.
He has. I really do. I should have mentioned him earlier. I do think he came off as sort of one of the more centrist, kind of reasonable candidates, and that's saying a lot with this field, because those candidates, the other bad part about this debate is it pushes them so far to the left, they're going to have a hard time getting themselves back to the middle to be competitive against Donald Trump in the fall. But I think Mayor Pete was one of those. And even whenever he had probably the most difficult moment of the debate was whenever he had to address the police shooting. Yeah. And I thought he handled that very well. I mean, most Americans look at that and say, when someone can admit a mistake and not just try and defend themselves or blame it on someone else, they come across as real, and they come across as someone who's heartfelt and thoughtful. And he did that. And I think he does a very good job connecting on a one-to-one basis. He's sort of a diplomat in terms of the way he addresses his plans. And I think he's probably got a lot to gain here as well.
But I guess the question is he in it for the long haul when it comes to picking up the support against someone like Kamala Harris, who is surging? You look at those numbers here in that poll we had up earlier. She's at 17%. He's at 4%. So what does he have to do to climb?
Well, you're going to have a lot of surges in Iowa over the next few months. If you think back to 2016, I mean, there was 5 or 6 candidates that led in Iowa at one point. I think really the biggest equivalent to Biden leading today was Jeb Bush, who in all the early polls led. And then you had Scott Walker, who led. And then you had And then you had Ben Carson who led. And so you're going to have a lot of that same sort of approach, the same sort of dynamic occurring on the Democratic side this year. But in terms of to kind of be able to regain support there, to be able to solidify where you are, it really does get down to just the retail campaigning, going door to door, doing a lot of town halls, and making sure that you're connecting with voters.
Got to get in there and do it. All right, Chris, thank you so much.
Right.
We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.